Welcome to Leaders Legacy. I'm your host, Varsha Sarkar, and the topic for today is the role of emotional intelligence in performance management. Our guest here today is Amanda Turbeville, who is the Chief Human Resource Officer at HCP. Thanks for coming to our show, Amanda.
Sure, I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Amanda, I wanted to ask you, as a seasoned leader yourself, can you share a few instances where emotional intelligence played a very major role in your team's success and how you
Yes,
managed it?
yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the role for so long, I had to dig deep to kind of narrow down performance specifically, because emotional intelligence in HR is like an everyday thing, right?
Yes.
So I kind of narrowed down one where in my current job or in most of my jobs that I've had in the past, we
Mm-hmm.
had a complete revamp of just the performance review process overall, including the systems, topics of discussion, competencies, et cetera, et cetera. So while I roll out the changes, I make sure to chat with managers
Mm-hmm.
to ask them not only about the role, but the behaviors we expect in those roles. We then use their feedback to add emotional intelligence, behavioral competencies to performance review process. So now when these talks happen, right, nobody gets caught off guard. And I should say the manager and the employee, because they know what's expected and not just the task, but how they handle things emotionally. So when we've started doing this and really started thinking that through, it's been a complete game changer. It stops surprises during performance chats and set everyone up for success. Managers are better prepared because it's going to have that spotlight on emotional intelligence, and
Right.
employees know exactly what is expected. So everyone deals with emotions and making our workplace a better and more successful place to be.
What strategies or exercises that you have implemented in your profession that you have found to be effective in training the individuals to be more emotionally intelligent, if that's a word? Because when people come into the organization, they don't really know how to handle other people, especially in leadership roles. So,
Well,
have you used
correct.
any exercises for that?
Yes, absolutely. And to your point, because our workforce is so diverse, emotional intelligence, it varies upon each person, right? It's a complete
Right.
debate, and I'll get more into that later. But so with that being said, enhancing emotional intelligence in an organization is a multifaceted challenge. There are a slew of exercises, and I'll be honest with you, it was trial and error that I implemented to try to find, some exercises or strategies that worked. And the top three that I found was self-awareness exercises, active listening practices, and feedback and constructive criticism are the top, three. There are others.
Right.
But self-awareness exercises this is where individuals engage in
Mm-hmm.
their regular self-reflection. Active
Right.
listening is focused on being an attentive listener, because
Mm-hmm.
that's a challenge for a lot of people, is being an
Right.
active listener. And feedback on constructive criticism is, we want to emphasize to foster a culture where
Mm-hmm.
giving and receiving feedback is constructive rather than critical,
Right.
and provide training on delivering feedback with empathy and receiving it with an open mind. And although that sounds simple for
Mm-hmm.
most, that can be a little complicated because everybody has their way and they feel that it needs to be this way.
Right.
So those are the top three.
Well, coming to my next question is related to this. From an HR perspective, how exactly do you integrate emotional intelligence in performance review and overall performance management? Because many a times I have actually come across managers when during performance reviews, they get negative feedback that either they were too harsh or it didn't come across well. The other person felt very upset about what they have been told. So how do you handle such situations?
Oh, yeah. So before these type of reviews or conversations happen, we have to have like some kind of performance review plan, and how to the question itself, holistic, and that's a huge word in here. How do you get to that holistic approach is the first step to that. So that right there leads me to 360 feedback, customized development plans, and then linking emotional intelligence to career progression. And I think in order to have these performance review conversations without sounding too harsh, or performance review conversations where I've heard that they weren't, I'm not going to say harsh enough, but they weren't forthright enough, led to more complexities of expectations that a team member should bring to the table. So I'll go into a little bit more detail on that. So 360 feedback is the most talked about, but the most undervalued in my opinion. When building out a performance review structure, the 360 feedback mechanism, that it includes an evaluation of emotional intelligence. But also what I like about this is if you're a company starting out and you don't know how to implement 360 feedback, there are third-party businesses that can go in there, be neutral parties, take the feedback and compare it to internal feedback within their systems. Therefore, nobody is the bad guy when implementing this type of structure moving forward. The customized development plans that I touched to, they tailor to specific emotional intelligence needed, identified during performance reviews. This could involve targeted coaching, mentoring, participation with relevant projects. But more importantly, just as I mentioned earlier, make sure that you're including emotional intelligence competencies. And then to go a little bit further in the linking emotional intelligence to career progression, this is connecting it to the development as an opportunity to emphasize that emotional intelligence is not only valued, but also critical for advancement. This can be notated and or worked into metrics and or promotion criteria.
Can you give a few examples of what metrics do you, or what questions do you ask a person to gauge their emotional intelligence, maybe during the hiring process?
Oh, yes, during the hiring process. It could be something as simple as, and this is the more standard question, you and your employee are, you and your employee or a past employee have come to a disagreement. How would you handle the disagreement? You can do they agree to disagree? Did you get into a full-blown room and kind of hash it out? Or how do you handle those? Really targeting those type of questions and asking just how they overall handle things is a great way to do that. But also there are questions that I've seen and I, have done in the past where you ask questions which kind of throw everyone off. For example, have you heard of the elephant question? Where if you had an elephant, you can't sell it, you can't do, et cetera, you can't do this, what would you do with that, right? And that will show a lot of expression on somebody and their overall thought process.
Right. That's really something I feel I should tell my organizations to use, because we have had a few conflicts like that. And I feel, people should be trained about it. If not, the right question should be asked during hiring so that you can gauge whether they're compatible with the organization or not. Amanda, coming to my next question, we are in an age of technology. Have you ever used AI or any other related tools to kind of complement emotional intelligence during performance management?
Yes, AI is awesome, but it's also can be not so awesome to put it in a good comparison there. But AI is good for the main top thing that everybody's aware of: data, right?
Yes.
I mean, there are times where I went on AI and I had amounts of, let's say I had to do a comparison and find patterns within conversations. I have used AI to simplify my life, and I have taken that feedback, put it in AI and say, find me these patterns, and make me a chat cloud. And it's awesome how all that data comes out. And I'm just like, man, this is such a time saver. So the great thing about AI is the data can complement the qualitative aspects as well of emotional intelligence. And then by offering a quantitative perspective. So that's where AI is great, right?
Yes.
AI is not great. And I stress this to everybody. I'm like, this is where it becomes a little bit more complex, because one major challenge is the potential for AI bias in algorithms, right? AI
Right.
is so therefore it can perpetuate and even amplify existing biases in performance evaluation, and which can essentially impact the emotional intelligence or overall the assessment or performance review, right? AI may struggle to fully capture the emotional nuances of human interactions. I compare it to like text or email. When you're
Right.
sending out a text or email, there is no emotion to it. You're
Yes.
saying what you need to say. And I'm sure maybe it's happened to you or other people. You can interpret that text into so many different things. Like
Yes.
if you don't show like a smiley face in it, whatever the case may be. So I compare it to that. I would say, yeah, understanding the emotional intelligence often require a level of context and subtly that technology may not grasp. I would
Yes.
say the bigger challenges it would be privacy concerns and
Mm-hmm.
over-reliance on technology, because AI provides answers at the tip of your fingers. What comes back is not the end all be all. I think a lot of people are now coming super comfortable of a copy and paste of whatever, let's say, the AI bots use. I'm not going to do any shout outs here, but whatever AI bot that you use,
Yeah.
it's a copy and paste. So what you really need to jazz it up and put your own spin or personality on it. It should be a tool to enhance, not replace the interpersonal empathetic elements of performance management.
You know, in an organization, having conflict is inevitable. So, how do you use emotional intelligence to, find a resolution to those conflicts? And how do you exactly train leaders so that they can remove their interpersonal biases using emotional intelligence?
Before I dive in that specific,
Mm-hmm.
I want to discuss just overall so everybody's on the same page, right?
Mm-hmm.
What goes into emotional intelligence? So the definition of EI, as I mentioned earlier, is a subject of debate. However, based on studies, emotional
Mm-hmm.
intelligence is defined or broken down as the ability to perceive and express emotion,
Right.
assimilate emotion and thought, understand the reason with emotion, and regulate emotions in self and others.
Mm-hmm.
Of the four mentioned there, emotional regulation is the hardest
Yes.
for most people, right?
Right.
It's the
Yeah.
hardest. So, but I guess the side note on that, right, is people unconsciously use emotion regulation strategies to cope with difficult situations many times throughout the day, not only professional, but also in personal lives, right?
Right.
So the ability to manage one's emotions and remain composed in high situation is a hallmark of emotional intelligence. Therefore, leaders who can regulate their emotions are better equipped to navigate conflicts without escalating tensions.
Right.
So I wanted to start there because emotional intelligence, people think of it being one thing, but
Yes.
it's multiple things. And the advice I would give leaders is address issues early.
Right.
Addressing conflicts early on and preventing them from escalating into larger, more disruptive issues is key. It allows for straightforward resolution. I emphasize this. You have to be comfortable with having uncomfortable and or tough conversations.
Yeah.
The number one issues that I find with conversations or lack thereof is avoidance. But yet, for example, the manager expects the employee to change without lying out any expectations. And you can
Right.
see where that disconnect can lead to problems, right? Another thing I would say is promote open communication, and or facilitate constructive conversations. Because sometimes when having conversations, things can get sidetracked really quick and lead
Yes.
to other things that you weren't anticipating and or expecting. So as leaders, you need to guide the conversations towards
Right.
constructive resolutions. And this involves focusing on solutions rather than blame or encourage a forward-thinking approach to address underlying issues. Lastly, and I think this is the most important, is the snowball effect.
Hmm.
Are you familiar with the snowball effect?
Yes, like, you know, when something goes wrong, if you keep hiding it, it just keeps on becoming a bigger problem. I'm not sure, but I think
Yeah.
that's the thing.
So the snowball effect can be used in multiple ways. So just think of a snowball, right? When you're rolling a snowball,
Yeah.
it keeps piling, it keeps piling, it
Yes.
keeps piling, it keeps piling, right?
Right.
So the one thing that I tell managers or leaders is be the snowball. So what does that mean? You should model the behaviors that you wish to see in your teams.
Right.
Demonstrating emotional intelligence in their own actions or your own actions sets a positive example for others to follow. So
Right.
if you're not doing it, why would your team do it?
Of course, yeah.
So I know that everyone's like, that's so obvious, but is it though? Because
It's not like when you put
Yeah.
it to action, it's not so obvious.
correct. Because
Yes.
when you're in high emotion, let's call it conversation, sometimes you get so wrapped up in your opinion that it becomes something that you didn't want it to be.
Right. Amanda, can you share a personal experience where you have seen positive impact of having being emotionally intelligent in your workplace and in your team as well?
Yeah, you know, what I can share is during my tenure and sitting down and having conversations with managers of all departments and or even CEOs. Being involved in those conversations that I've worked with and recognizing changes in their responses, their questions and interactions amongst their team members.
Right.
So for example, I hear things like the employee needed a vent, essentially needed like a punching bag, right? Once the employee was able to let it out, the conversation became more focused and we were able to narrow down like the main issues.
Right.
I also witnessed improved conversations, conflict resolution, of course, and enhanced work and collaboration, and overall productivity, just to name a few. When the employees or managers start being more comfortable, again, having these uncomfortable, real, raw conversations.
Right.
So that's what I would, but none of this would work. Like if you're not being direct and specific, you're not offering insights in a timely fashion, you're not keeping it genuine, maybe even keep it a bit informal, and you're not listening to employees' response and being mindful of their body language.
Right. That's but do you have any tips for newbies joining an organization on how they can hone their emotional intelligence in dealing their superiors? Because many times in my personal experience, the freshers who come in, they do get into trouble because of that, because they can't gauge the superiors' expectations, or they don't know how to behave properly, emotionally speaking. So how can they hone that?
Well, so here's my main advice that I give everyone, and I may have mentioned it previously. Focus on the problem, not the person, right?
Yes.
If you are recognizing an issue or recognizing a pattern, let's not even say an issue. Let's say you're recognizing a pattern. That's probably your cue to focus on that pattern, because that continues to happen, right?
Yes.
So I would always say, because everyone's going to have their own opinions, and let's talk about it in an organization sense, right? Just because you think that's how it should be, that doesn't mean that matches the organization.
Yes.
So you need to make sure that everyone's aligned and clear and transparent. But the best advice I can give anybody, focus on the problem, not the person, because those emotions are going to get heightened. I see it all the time. But also to, for the manager as well, it's again, if they're not comfortable and or used to having those uncomfortable or tough conversations, even if I tell you something as simple as focus on the problem, not the person, they still won't be able to do that because, quite frank, they just may not be ready. They haven't had enough exposure to this and they still think themselves.
Right. Thank you so much, Amanda, for this very insightful conversation. It will definitely help our viewers and readers. That concludes today's episode of Leaders Legacy. If you like this episode, please do like, subscribe to our show. Until next time, have a great day.